Welcome everyone to our City Council informational meeting. Today is the 6th of February in 2017. We're glad to have all of you here in the audience with us. And for those of you watching at home, welcome and thanks for taking an interest in your city government. We'll open up with city open discussion. Do we have anything? Councilor Starr.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm proud this afternoon to talk a little bit about, we have another, I'll call it an episode of the Living Library coming up this Sunday afternoon from 2 to 4 o'clock at the Oak View Branch Library over at 3700 East 3rd Street. Obviously in February, it's in recognition of Black History Month. The feature book this time is a black woman who lived in the South during the Civil Rights era. Other book titles include An Adoptive Mother, which is close to our family, which happens to be my wife doing that part of the presentation. There's also a talk about mental illness, a bipolar woman released from federal prison, being gay in school, an Ethiopian Muslim university student, being a Muslim youth, Muslim Indian woman in America, domestic violence survivor, a Latino, a criminal or a hero, and a Native American artist and an atheist. Again, the Living Library was listed number 7 on the top 10 wins for the 2016 for the Siouxland Libraries. The Living Library has been just an incredible program that's meant a lot to my family and a lot of people who've been able to participate. So I invite everyone to come over Sunday afternoon from 2 to 4 at the Oakview Library.
Thank you very much. Councilor Staley, yes.
I just wanted to report back that I spent the weekend at the Benson Flea Market, and the week before that, Councilor Neisert and I, and Christine Erickson was going to go, but she became ill. But the week before that, we went to the Hy-Vee over on Marion Road and met with citizens, and I just think it's such a neat experience, and the citizens are always so excited when we step out of this venue and come into where they live and listen to their concerns, and they're more than eager to share how they feel about the city. So I hope we'll continue to do more of that as a group and also maybe in smaller groups around town.
Thank you very much. I would encourage people to attend those as much as they can. Seeing no other, yes, Councilor Urbanbach.
Probably against my better judgment, but I just wanted to give a shout out to there's no firefighters here today, but a shout out to the fire department. I had an interesting experience with our firefighters this week. I learned what it's like to call 911 and to be treated to the joys of having four trucks at my mom's house this week. And I just wanted to say that you know, some of you know that I have fire service people in my family, and I had never had the experience of calling 911 and having that happen, and it was not delightful, but very uplifting and very professional. And I think that it was, for me, one of those times when I put this job into reality, and I very often do that. You see that driving down the streets. But so it was one of those times when you go, yeah, this is why I'm a city councilor. And I just wanted to, again, shout out to the firefighters and those folks that were involved with that incident that turned out to be happy. It was fine. The squirrel that was involved was not so happy, and he is fried, but other than that, we're good. But thanks to everybody that was involved.
Yeah, you said it smelled like barbecue in your house.
It smelled like barbecue for a while, and so then they were going, Michelle, what did you cook this weekend? And
yeah.
then that was the end of it. So
I don't know. Yeah, I better not make that comment. Anyway, thank you very much. Anything else? Okay, seeing no other open discussion, thank you very much for all those comments, everybody. We'll move on to our presentations and first start with our city attorney, David Fifley, about the collective bargaining update.
Thank you, councilors. Dave Fifley with the City Attorney's Office. I've been requested by several of you to provide a brief update on the status of the collective bargaining process with 2 of the city's labor groups, that being the Fraternal Order of Police and also the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees. The acronyms for those groups are FOP and AFSCME, respectfully. The information that I'm going to briefly share with you has already been shared by with the council It has been presented at budget presentations and the like. It won't be anything new to any of you, but frankly, this is more for the public's benefit in terms of how the budgeting process works and some background into why we're getting to where we are today. First of all, some background on the finance process. The city has a general fund that is comprised of the first penny of the sales tax and the city's share of the property taxes, along with miscellaneous fees generated. The general fund pays for city employee salaries, including police and AFSCME. 84% of all employees are paid from the general fund. 100% of public safety employees are paid from the general fund. This first graph shows how much of the general fund goes to pay for employee wages and benefits. Sales and property tax revenues account for over 75% of the general fund revenue and is the fund where the vast majority of employee wages and benefits are paid. As you can see from the graph, 67 cents out of every dollar goes to city employee wages and benefits. This represents a high level of commitment and budget priority for the City Council towards providing for employee benefits and wages. A further breakdown under this slide shows the general fund personnel services on the left, shows again the 67 cents of every dollar, and on the right the circle graph shows the various types of personnel or wages, salaries, and benefits provided for out of that 67 cents of the dollar. As a further budget breakdown, in 2007, the City Council adopted a resolution which required a 25% budget reserve for the general fund, or the operating fund as it's normally called, the general fund. The City Council has made it clear the last 10 years that dipping into the 25% reserve fund should only be done in emergencies. Furthermore, as you are aware, the city collects a second penny in sales tax, and under City Council adopted ordinance section 37.002, you require that the second penny sales tax is designated only for capital improvements, debt retirement, furnishings, and furniture, better known as capital expenses, not operating expenses. A little background on the economic climate. Since last spring, the sales tax growth rate for Sioux Falls, like the rest of the state, has been lagging below expectations. 2016 ended at a 3.4% growth rate. Revenue projections were revised in light of these new conditions, and the 2017 budget that was adopted by the City Council is based on a 4% growth in sales tax revenues rather than a standard 6 to 7% growth rate. This slide shows the sales tax collections without audits, cumulative 12-month rolling growth rate. This is a monthly slide provided to you during Tracy Turbach's financial report to you, and this is the more recent one, just updating the public as far as where the sales tax growth has gone over the last 12 months. Due to this lagging climate, sales tax growth, the City Council adopted a fairly flat budget. It would be a term to be used. This next slide shows the City Council's adopted budget for 2017 as it regards to the general fund. You will note that other than some inflationary costs with rentals, the only other item that increased that was done by the City Council was almost $4 million in additional funds dedicated to personnel costs, the costs that we had shown you earlier. Again, this shows a high priority by the City Council to take care of the city employees. In this climate, we've all heard the governor in his January address to the state legislature that he is recommending a 1% cost of living allowance, or COLA, for all state employees. These employees would include the Division of Criminal Investigation and the State Highway Patrol. As far as the property tax revenues, for 2017, these were essentially frozen by state law due to the low rate of inflation. So for all practical purposes, there is no inflationary increase in property taxes for 2017. Also in this climate, the Minnehaha County deputy sheriffs received a 2% COLA this year and then a 1% COLA for next year. Now to provide you a little background legally on the collective bargaining process. South Dakota law does not allow public employees to strike. However, they may negotiate with their local governments, employers on matters of pay, wages, hours of employment, or other conditions of employment through collective bargaining under state statute. You may have heard that public employers and employees are required to negotiate collectively in good faith under state statute. Like so many things in the law, good faith is not easily defined. But the courts have generally said that the parties in engaging in good faith negotiations must seriously work to resolve differences and reach a common understanding. Now, the courts have also said that a public employer like the city is not required to agree to any specific rates of pay, wages, or other conditions of employment. And in fact, the United States Supreme Court, as well as our South Dakota Supreme Court, has held on repeated occasions that unions do not have a unilateral veto over wage terms. Now, in this climate, we had significant economic issues in terms of their impact on the labor negotiations. As you've heard, sales tax was not growing as initially projected. State law was not providing for any real property tax increase for 2017, and we also had the 25% reserve fund that we had to honor and obey in terms of the operating funds. We also had low inflation. And again, inflation is what a COLA is meant to offset. As of June of 2016, the CPI, or the Consumer Price Index for urban areas, which is what we use as the indicator, was only 1%. For the public benefit, a cost of living adjustment is defined as an inflationary increase applied to the pay scales. And the city utilizes the Consumer Price Index, all urban areas, to measure wage inflation. Please keep in mind that a COLA is not based on merit, and it is not a performance-based raise. It primarily guards against inflation for employee wages, as I've stated earlier. With the CPI being only at 1% last June, this certainly affected salaries of many city people, including the city's elected officials, you folks. Some years, those salaries have even decreased for the elected officials as a matter of note. And city employees, however, the rank and file employees, have never had their salaries reduced, even when the CPIU has been a negative number. That would have happened in the recession of 2008, 2009. For this year, city council staff, the fire department, and certain management employees have already had the 1.5% COLA implemented. I'll break down now into the negotiations with each of the labor groups, and I'll just summarize them briefly. The city and the FOP began collective bargaining on a new labor agreement on May 3rd, 2016. The labor agreement was set to expire on December 31st, 2016. The parties held 7 collective bargaining sessions. Agreement on non-economic items was achieved and produced constructive dialogue. I think that is often overlooked when you see the reports out there in the public domain. We had a lot of good constructive dialogue, and on the non-economic terms, I think we came to a very good consensus. Some of those non-economic terms included shift scheduling, military leave policy revisions, funeral leave issues, and the city agreed to the FOP's suggestion on scheduling of grievance timelines, just to give you an example. The FOP began by requesting a 4% COLA and ultimately demanded a 3% COLA for the years 2017 and 2018, as well as a $1,500 per member annual payment for longevity pay and tripling their shift differential pay from 50 cents to $1.50 per hour. Shift differential would be other than the daytime shift, an additional. The FOP demanded that the city team dip into the emergency reserve fund, again, that 25% reserve, or even extract funds from the second penny to satisfy their wage demands. The city's negotiating team refused, as it was against the budget policy and the laws and policies established by the city council. The city's last best offer to the FOP was a 1.5% COLA for years 2017 and 2018, as well as a doubling of the shift differential pay from 50 cents to $1 per hour. To boil it down to actual dollars, The 1.5% COLA would represent an additional cost of $300,000 per year. The doubling of the shift differential pay would represent an additional cost of $76,000 per year. As I stated earlier, a COLA is only a hedge against inflation. Well, what other types of mechanisms are out there to provide for increases in pay? FOP membership, like all city employees, is eligible for what we call step increases. There are 9 steps, which are based on merit and can be achieved with good performance over a 12-year period. Each step increase is approximately 4 to 5% increase in salary for police officers. Police sergeants have 3 steps over a 4-year period, which they can attain, and each step increase represents a 3.5% increase in salary. All officers in steps 1 through 4 are eligible for annual step increases, and all others are eligible every other year. So the first 4 steps go every year, and then after that, up through step 9, they're every 2 years. This next slide shows kind of a summary of what happens in terms of the steps 1 through 5 every 12 months, 6 through 9 steps every 24. But the value of a merit step increase is 4 to 5% for police officers. Police sergeants shows that is steps 7 through 9 at 3.5% increases every 24 months. In terms of actual dollars, a police officer minimum wage is $48,942, and a maximum is $69,451. The average is $64,335. A police sergeant has 3 steps built in, as we've discussed, and has a minimum of $74,651 and a maximum of $80,038. The average for police sergeants is $84,330. That would include overtime incurred. As you know, the FOP declared an impasse in labor negotiations, and that's been out there in the public domain. And the FOP requested the South Dakota Department of Labor to facilitate a possible resolution to a labor negotiation impasse. The city team and the FOP negotiating teams attended a conciliation conference with a South Dakota administrative law judge, and we also attended a fact-finding hearing before the director of the Department of Labor of South Dakota. The director of the South Dakota Department of Labor heard the FOP arguments and the city's financial situation from our team. The director of the South Dakota Department of Labor heard comparative wage information based on the salary data in 13 regional cities. This next graph you've been provided before shows how the city of Sioux Falls compares to 13 regional peer cities. The cities are listed. Market value is if you are within 95% to 105% of the survey's average wages. The police officer, you'll note, is 99 to 98% of the average, and police sergeant was 110% on the minimum, and a maximum it was 95%. Director of the South Dakota Department of Labor found from the data proffered by the FOP at the hearing that the city has maintained market competitive wages for police officers, and importantly, the director noted that the city has significantly above market competitive wages for police sergeants. To summarize the fact findings by the South Dakota Department of Labor, they issued a report on January 24, 2017, again summarizing that police officers earn a competitive salary range and police sergeants had a significantly more than competitive salary range. Ultimately, the South Dakota Department of Labor recommended that the city's proposal be implemented. South Dakota law allows a public employer to impose its last best offer after the South Dakota Department of Labor has concluded its administrative process. That South Dakota Department of Labor administrative process is completed. Slide 10 is the South Dakota Supreme Court citation indicating under South Dakota law that a public employer may unilaterally implement the disputed provisions if the parties have bargained in good faith and a legitimate impasse exists. Before the City Council adopted the 2017 budget back in last September of 2016, you will recall that the FOP had communicated with you requesting that the City Council adopt a budget amendment to fund their 3% COLA demand. The FOP asked that either the city dip into a second penny account or the reserve fund to meet their demands. The City Council members, you, did not propose any amendment to the budget and instead adopted the 2017 budget, approving the monies representing a 1.5% COLA for all city employees. Now to summarize AFSCME negotiations. The AFSCME negotiations took about half the number of sessions of the FOP, and were also very constructive dialogue was held on most items. We certainly had good constructive dialogue on the non-economic items. AFSCME, through the negotiation process, was given a final best offer of 1.5% COLA based on the lagging sales tax growth and the financial climate that we've already demonstrated. AFSCME union leadership unanimously, tentatively agreed to the 1.5% COLA, but their negotiating team was unable to obtain their membership's approval. AFSCME did not invoke the South Dakota Department of Labor process, and that is also at a point where the last best offer could be implemented as it goes to AFSCME. On the City Council meeting of February 14th, we will be presenting two resolutions, one for the FOP contract and one for the AFSCME contract, requesting the City Council to implement the last best offers to each of these labor groups. Adopting these resolutions would be in accordance with the Council's approved budget. These two agreements would be two-year agreements. As you may have read from the Department of Labor report, it did mention a 2018 salary study. Briefly, how that occurs is the city HR works with each of the union groups, and they together select an expert, independent expert, to conduct a salary survey for each of those groups. Obviously, the city wants to ensure that we are market competitive with other public employers so that we continue to attract quality workers and retain the quality workers that we already have on board already. In conclusion, we are not unmindful that people are involved here. Each of us on the negotiating team has family members, friends, and co-workers that are part of these labor negotiating groups. Our respect and honor of the work that these dedicated public servants do cannot be understated or, overstated. However, this COLA that we are talking about is not merit-based and is simply a guard against inflation, which as of June 1st of 2016 was at 1%. As you are also aware, this council has already approved a 1.5% COLA for 17 and 18 for the International Association of Firefighters, our local firefighter group. And that is the status of where we are, and now we'll be open for any questions.
Are there questions for Councilor Kiley?
Thank you, Attorney Fifley. I missed the average pay for sergeant. I had the minimum in the 74,000 range, maximum 80,000.
I had to check that 3 times myself, Counselor. It's 84,330. There's approximately 30 police sergeants, and I believe that uptick is due to overtime.
Okay, so the average exceeds the maximum.
Correct.
Okay, so then I did hear it correctly.
Yes, I
right,
checked that. I had to keep checking that myself. Good,
all right,
good question.
thank you. And then can you tell me what percentage of our officers in the 2-year contract period will receive a merit pay increase in addition to the 1.5?
Pardon me. It varies between 40 to 50% depending on the year. I mean, when you have those 2-year intervals, some years you don't have, it's just your numbers. It may not be quite as many, but approximately half to close to half are probably eligible for a step increase at any given point. And that's membership-wide of the FOP.
17 and 18. Okay,
Yes.
Thank you.
Councilor Saley, did you have, oh, I'm sorry. Thought I saw your hand up. Councilor Neitzer.
Are negotiations over?
Yes.
Does that mean the bar to talking to the union representation is now gone?
That's your call, Counselor. your discretion. The FOP declared an impasse. Negotiations, they said, were unproductive. So we went to what's called an administrative process with the South Dakota Department of Labor. Now we are back where we will be requesting next week an implementation of our last best offer. And in terms of the ground rules, they apply to negotiations, but again, negotiations have ceased. So now we're at a point where we're asking the council to act on our last best offer.
So my concern is over the last several months, we've been barred from stepping into this, which I understand the reason why. And we've heard a lot of the city side, and frankly, this group back here has been muzzled. And I guess I would like to say I would hope that, I don't know if AFSCME's here, but I would hope that they'd be invited up to give their side. We've heard a lot of the city side, they're here.
Counselor, I mean, certainly those groups will have an opportunity to speak to you next week when those resolutions are there. I tried to keep my comments objective in terms of a history and where we are. And in terms of not commenting, we were doing that out of respect for the Department of Labor process after negotiations had ceased and the FOP was taking it to the Department of Labor. We did not want a bunch of comments out there that were going to try and improperly influence that process and allow them as a neutral third party to make their findings, which they did.
Yeah, and I respect that. I just look at the groups and they get to talk to us at the 11th hour. And
as you are aware, Counselor, the FOP has had several communications with you, so I respectfully disagree that they haven't had an opportunity to share their side of the story.
Councilor Erickson.
Thank you. I just have one question, and then I need you to help me understand this because contracts is not in my wheelhouse usually. My first question is, can you tell me the percentage of employees represented by all three unions? Just how many employees are we talking?
I'll have Bill
Not everyone is
right.
union.
Bill O'Toole would know the exact numbers, but ballpark.
He's right behind you. Let's let him
Well,
answer.
I mean, I'm not going to hold you the
exact numbers or ballpark?
but approximate. What are we looking at?
Council Bill O'Toole, Human Resources. I'm going to ballpark it for you. It's about 80. I'd say 80% of our employees are represented by one of these three respective unions.
Okay, thank you. So then I have another question for you, Mr. Fifley. Help me understand why we even need a contract. I mean, what? Just kind of bring it back to kindergarten level here for me and help me understand just the basics of why we have to have a contract in place. Is it the union? What is that?
It's actually in their best interest, Counselor, because right now we're just continuing to operate under the last contract, and they are not enjoying the benefit of a 1.5% COLA, these two other labor groups that the fire department through their negotiating team are enjoying already. So in terms of last best offer, a 1.5% is certainly better than zero any day of the week.
Councilor Staley.
Well, first of all, I would disagree with your comment that they have had ample opportunity to communicate with us, because after this came out of the gate, we were contacted by Jason Holbeck, I believe, and you told us not to talk with them. We told them that. They were very respectful. I haven't had any dialogue with these people since months ago, since this first happened, nor with their attorney. So I don't believe that they have had an opportunity to tell their side of the story to us. And I know in the past we've had people come up. I think there are several council members here who would like to hear from one of their representatives today, to give them that opportunity. And I don't know what the protocol is for that. But let me also say, as we move forward here, and I understand that we're coming into some very tight budget constraints, but you talked about the council did not approve allowing for an extra pay increase. We also did not approve as a council building that administration building. And it's a hard sell, I'm just saying publicly, when we are moving forward with a building that is going to be taxing that first penny as well. Operational cost, yes, to heat the building,
No.
Staff-wise, that's not coming out of an operational budget. I believe it is. So
Technically, yeah,
I'm just
you're mixing things up there, but go ahead.
operational budget
Correct. Go
pays
ahead.
for heat and staff. Yes. And so it's a hard sell to the public when we're doing one thing and then we say to these other entities, we can't fund this.
Well, you've also made comments out in the public, Counselor, that you believe the second penny should be used for operating expenses and all sorts of things.
I was
And
talking
again,
about water and sewer rates, yes.
well, you've also hinted that that should be done as far as employee salaries. And again,
No,
we're
I've
having
never said
marching
that.
orders.
I
We
have
are
not
having
said
marching
that.
orders from you folks. We take our marching orders seriously. We do our duty as far as what authority we have, and you, with the power of the purse, set that budget authority.
But for clarity, where is the funds, where will they come from in the new building for the heat, for the staff? What does that come from?
I'm going to ask you to stay on topic, which is, the topic is the labor negotiations and the approval of this. Everyone knows where those come from, and it does come from operations. Your point is made.
Okay,
Move on,
well,
please.
thank you. First penny. So again, I would like to give these people an opportunity to speak at this time.
Councilor Beck, did you have something?
I don't even know how to say it. We have these on agendas in the future, correct? The resolutions for the attorney, for these increases to their salaries. We have those on the agenda in the future. We can absolutely hear folks at that time. This is not something that's the 11th hour. And I'd remind my colleagues on the council that we voted 1.5% already. We built this box. We haven't been forced into something. If we had wanted to increase that, we would have done it at the time that we voted on the budget. And I just think we have to be really clear that if we're going to entertain something like this far into a budget year, then we better figure out how we're going to amend a massive budget. We have done our part already. And so I just hesitate to, number one, violate what we normally do as terms of policy here in this session, and then number two, to go against what we have already voted on, and we spent a lot of time on budget. So I would respectfully ask that we not hear public input in this forum, as is our normal, and that we move on in the agenda if we might, Mr. Chair.
Councilor Neitzer.
I do have a question about ASME, but I will say that having watched council for years, by the time the second reading comes, the decision is frankly pretty much made. For ASME, what was the vote? Was that ever stated? Did they?
You need to respond first. These would be resolutions, Counselor, so they'd be first readings, the only reading of those. It wouldn't be second reading.
No, I think he's talking about
But-
the vote of the people in ASME to accept or reject.
But in terms of the, I'll get to that. Then in terms of the vote, I do not know the percentage of their membership
Okay, and then
voted one way or the other.
I'm sorry for interrupting. So the city's last and best offer when it came to the money part of it, not the other non-money parts of it, was there any, did you start at a different number and move a little bit? The police apparently dropped. Did you get somewhere to the middle? I mean, what, do you remember?
We started at a 1 and they started at a 4, Counselor, and then in terms of what your budget ordinance said, we had the authority for a 1.5% COLA.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, Councilor Starr.
Attorney Fifley, could you do this the right way, but can you switch hats for a minute for me from lead negotiator as part of this process and maybe your role as city attorney advising us as a council? I guess what I'm looking for is some advice. What are our options when the resolution comes to us next week or in the future? Do we have the ability to say that both teams should go back and continue to negotiate? Do we have the ability to, I mean, obviously we have the ability to vote yes or no on the resolution and implementing last and final offer. So give me, as a councilor, a member of this council, what our options are and what ability we have at this point in the process.
Overall, Counselor, I think you certainly have the ability to say yes or no to the resolutions next week. You are correct. In terms of where do we go from there, if you were to reject it, the City Council would need to go in and look at the 2017 budget ordinance and determine are there cuts in other programs, other operating expenses that could be made in order to fund a 3% COLA. by the as demanded by the FOP. If you were to dip into the reserve fund, you would need to repeal the resolution that you have on the 25% reserve. If you were to dip into the second penny, you would need to amend the ordinance 37002, I believe it is, and make the second penny eligible to pay for more than capital projects. So it would be quite a process, long and short of it.
Makes sense. I wanted to make a couple of other comments as we were talking about that 80% of our employees are covered in the bargaining unit, or a bargaining unit of the three. And I think maybe a reply for Councilor Erickson. I think the city benefits greatly by negotiating with our employees. As you stated earlier, Mr. Fifley, is that we're able to work out the non-monetary issues. There are working condition issues. There are a number of things. There is great benefit to our employees, but there are also great benefits to us as a city to put a wage structure in place under the auspices of a contract. Yes, it's difficult as our state law allows or doesn't allow us to do some things, but there is great benefit to having a contract and having something that both our employees and as a city that we get to benefit from, and makes it fair for a lot of our employees to, rather than negotiating a contract with each individual employee. It's a huge benefit, I believe, to our Human Resources Department as well as us as a city. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Councilor Kiley.
Just one quick follow-up question. I know at one point we had discussed the possibility of maybe including in contract language if sales tax revenue did go back up to the levels they had been previously, that we could then open this process up again and take a second look. Can you tell me the status of that?
That was done in August, discussed, Councilor Kiley, with the FOP leadership team. In terms of the city team at that time offered to put in what we'd call a wage reopener, where if sales tax growth began to pick up again for the last half of 2016, that we would be willing to put a provision in the contract that says for the 2018 wages, we would reopen that issue as far as a COLA for 2018 if sales tax went above, I believe it was 5.5% growth. The FOP leadership team's response was they didn't even want to take that to their membership, so that was where it stayed.
Councilor Selbert.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Attorney Fifley, a quick review, just probably for the viewing audience, because I get this question a lot as far as the, we talk about step increases. So you talk about steps 1 through 5, if an officer was to be approved for a step increase, step 1, this year, so he's eligible next year for another one, and then next year another one until he hits step 5, is that correct, each year?
Correct.
And each time they make a step up, it's 4 to 5% increase, correct? Now, is this something they apply for on their own each year, or is it strictly merit and they're recognized where they may be eligible by their?
It's done by your anniversary date of hire. Certainly, I'll speak for my own department in terms of, I think citywide it's the same way. You do a performance evaluation based on the anniversary date of hire, counselor. And then certainly if the employee by merit if they have achieved all the standards, as meeting or exceeding each of the performance standards, they'll be recommended for a merit increase, and that was that step increase. So that's how it works.
Is it very common, do you know, if somebody starts at step 1 in 1 year and 5 years gets a step 1 each year for 5 years straight, or is it, I'm just kind of wondering how that?
It's very common that that any employee would be achieving each of those merit-based steps on a timely basis. There are rare instances where perhaps there's a performance issue that they want to resolve and kind of hold it out there as, let's see how in 90 days can you achieve better performance, and then at that point we'll implement the merit increase. I know that's happened very rarely, Counselor. I mean, again, we have over 1,240 employees, and
Sure.
I can only think of less than 1 or 2 instances where that has been delayed by even 90 days. So it's usually pretty good. And frankly, that doesn't show that we're lax in our evaluations. It shows that we have very dedicated people.
Okay. Yeah, I think I understood it, but I wanted to have it repeated again for those that might be watching, because I do get that question quite a bit, so thank you.
I have one question, I guess, Dave, and that is, would it be appropriate now, if counselors had some questions, that they would visit with the union officials before our next meeting? During the negotiations, not appropriate to do that because of the negotiations going on, but now it would be okay before next week when the resolution comes.
Correct.
Okay, that would be your answer to be able to do that. If you are interested, to go ahead and take a look at that with the unions on an individual basis. Okay, thank you. You're looking at me like.
Well, I know I said I had one other question. I guess I have one more, if I may.
Okay.
Quick one. And I'd asked this question previously. We have 9 steps in the process. And I'd asked the question before, because I remembered my early years in the Sioux Falls school system. We had almost 30 steps to get to the top. Then they condensed it down to 15 so you could get there quicker, which paid off greatly for the individuals. Has anything like that ever occurred within this system? Has there been more than 9 steps? Were there like 16 steps and then we condensed it down to 9?
I'd have to defer to
somebody with some
Bill
history.
Counselor, at one time there was, I don't recall the number, but it has come down to where it is today. It's been this way for, gosh, at least probably 19, 20 years that I've been here, that 9 steps is the standard. It's one of those classic cases that, and I've said this before, that you appreciate the value of the steps and until you get to step 9, and then you want more. But that's kind of human nature. And I would like to respond to one other question too. I think that came up with respect to AFSCME membership and percentages and things of that nature. And just real quickly, and again, I'm going to be close but not spot on. They probably represent in the neighborhood of 450 employees, but their membership is probably in the neighborhood of 90, give or take. So 90 people represent the rest of those groups. That means they are dues-paying members of the union. So their vote, and I think the question was, what was the vote? Again, I don't remember those numbers, but it was, let's just call it, it was at least a majority of the AFSCME members that voted not to accept the terms. I think that was the nature of the question. So,
How about the police and fire on that percentage of membership in the union?
well, that was an overwhelming. I think there may have been only 1 or 2 members that actually voted to approve that. So it was overwhelming. Yeah.
They're basically all members?
Well, oh, you mean what percentage of members?
What percentage of members of how many police officers of the 350 or whatever police officer we have are members of the
probably
FOP?
98% or better.
Membership is 98% of officers.
Okay, that's what I
98%
want to
for
know.
the public who didn't hear that.
Okay. Good job. Okay. You may.
As long as we do
This
one
is
more, Bill,
important.
as long as you're here, I want to get this in. If we decide next week by resolution to implement the contract as last and best, do we pay the 1.5% going back? Is there a back pay type of process to January 1st, or does it go to when we force the contract on them?
It would be a prospective application, Counselor, and I believe the exact date would be March 13th. Would be the effective date after publication, and then the first pay period thereafter. So it would be prospective only.
Councilor Erickson?
So just piggybacking off of that, what if there's non-union members?
Whether they're dues-paying members or not, it doesn't matter.
So because 90 people held out, the other 360 don't get their COLA.
That is correct.
That's tough. All right, thanks.
Okay, we'll move on from there. Thank you very much for all who presented. We'll look forward to discussion next week. Mr. Greco, redistricting. We're growing and we need to redistrict. Please be careful when I say this. Redistricting the city's councilors' positions and territories, not the legislator, not the state legislature.
Okay, thank you. My name is Tom Greco. I'm the Sioux Falls City Clerk. So yes, I'm going to be talking about districting. So I'm going to get right into the meat of it now and just give you an overview right here of what I'll be talking about over the next few minutes. And that includes the need, purpose, and composition to address what Council Chair Rolfing just mentioned, the duties of both the City Council, which is why I'm here in large part, but also the Districting Commission once it's selected. Talk about districting criteria, in which case I'll move it or turn it over to Jeff Schmidt from Planning, a recommended timeline, and then also, not barring any objections from the Council, the procedures for individuals to actually go forth and apply to be a Districting Commission member. So right here is the meat of the issue, where we're at today in terms of the need for it. There are two stipulations within the charter. One of them is what I have before you here, and that's basically a 15% increase since the last redistricting. Last redistricting was in 2011, and we just recently had a city population estimate of 178,500, so that's been a more than 15% increase. The other provision in the charter that triggers redistricting is the decennial census, so we could expect to do it during this time period, but also following the decennial census in 2020. The purpose of what the Districting Commission itself does is they are responsible for preparing a plan for dividing the city into districts for the election of council members. Now, we already have 5 districts that's set by charter. What they will essentially do is adjust district boundaries in accordance with the criteria that's set forth in the city charter. And again, Jeff's going to talk about that criteria in a moment. The last piece here is the composition, and I'll talk more about the application process in a moment, but it does consist of 5 members, 1 from each of our current city council districts. No more than 3 commission members may belong to the same political party. 1, as I mentioned, will be from each current district. And finally, the commission, those 5 members, will choose their chairperson. So they'll be an entity operating under the auspice of the city council, fairly independent, obviously with oversight from the council. So let me talk about some of the jobs and duties that these different parties have. First, I'll start with the city council. I would say your primary task within the next several months here is to appoint those 5 members of the Districting Commission. The other piece is that you will essentially adopt the plan by not rejecting it. Of course, you have the opportunity to reject it once it's submitted, but once it's submitted by the Districting Commission, the City Council will have 21 days. After that, it'll be deemed adopted unless otherwise rejected. The other piece that goes along with this, and I have it listed there as a related duty, are changes to Chapter 2030 or Chapter 38 elections within our Code of Ordinances. Those are the specific boundaries of each precinct, and by adjusting those council districts will necessarily be adjusted as well. So there's a couple components here, a change to the map of those 5 council districts, and of course a change within our ordinance to the actual district boundaries. So going to the duties of the Districting Commission, their primary task is to prepare a plan, and that plan does consist very generally of a map and a description of the districts recommended by them using the criteria set forth in the city charter. Again, Jeff will discuss that on the next slide here. Also by charter, they are required to hold 1 or more public hearings, and they have to submit a plan to the City Council. Obviously, if it's rejected by the City Council, they'll be charged with revising that plan. Now, I mentioned 1 or more public hearings. That's a specific public hearing, but it does necessarily take a series of meetings for that Districting Commission to get together and review various options and come to a determination as to what they'll present during those public hearings, after which they'll make a determination based on the feedback they receive and submit a plan to the City Council. But before I go any further, I'm going to turn it over to Jeff, who's going to talk about that criteria and sort of the process as he's seen it, because he's had quite a bit of experience with these.
Thank you. Jeffrey Schmidt, representing planning staff on this item. This is the 4th time I've done this with the city clerks in the 18 years that I've been here. It's pretty well spelled out with the charter. And why we do this and why I'm involved in it, the city clerks facilitates the process, but we're the demographers. We do the mapping and we assist with basically the population information. So again, there's 5 criteria that's in the charter that's been put forth by a vote with the charter, but they have to be, most important, that the 5 districts are equal in population. You're representing a population, and when you're not equal, then we have to redistrict. That's, if you get questions, that's the biggest thing that you're getting out. And when Cal contacted me the other day, once they understand that, they're like, well, that makes sense then. You just have to redistrict to make sure that everybody's giving an equal representation. So then, secondly, districts shall be consistent. They should be contiguous. You don't want to sporadically throw them out here and there, so I got to make sure that's being done. We do not want the voting precincts to be divided too much within the counties. We have 2 counties represented here. And at the same time, with number 4, we want them to have as few into Lincoln County specifically as possible. In the past, when the commissions get together, you could do these basically straight lines and go north and south, and have 5 precincts. Well, that number 4 took care of that. The charter came in and said that is not the intent, to have these lineal directions, because then number 5 comes back and says, again, based upon the 4, you do not want this long length of boundaries where people in the north have to go all the way to the south to go all the way north. These 5 pieces of the pie should all represent a core area. And again, once you start looking at the 5 and you've seen the maps and we have the public meetings, the people go, well, yes, they're contiguous. They generally have the same populations. You didn't elongate them. You've done your work, and it really comes together pretty quickly, and then we have a timeline.
Okay, so certainly what I'm presenting here is a tentative timeline, and I've kind of broken it down into 2 separate pieces. One is the proposed application timeline, which is what I'm hoping to get your immediate feedback on today, but also what I call a model districting timeline, just a timeline that a commission can use as it goes forth throughout the year, and it's really just illustrative of the process of those gates they have to pass through to get to submission of a plan. But the first thing that I would like to be able to do today is open up the districting commission application process to citizens, available online and also in hard copy. But get that process started today with an application deadline of February 23rd. That time period is not dissimilar to the last couple of districting commissions that we had. It was open anywhere from 2 to 3 weeks for application. Before that deadline, I will say that I'll come back to the City Council the 3rd week of February and give you an update on the number of applications that we have and also solicit some of your feedback in the process going forward. But one thing I would plan on right now and just envision is obviously reviewing the applications individually, each counselor, but also getting back together to go through some sort of selection process. And ultimately, the goal, from my standpoint, is to have an appointment for resolution in mid-March so that the commission can get to work in early April once their appointments become effective. And from there, that bottom box in red, again, is just sort of a straw man of calendar dates that the commission can use to move forward in conducting the tasks that they have. Now, I will say one thing we will certainly want to do and have to do by law is have this process completed by the first notice of the next election, which would be, that first notice would be in January of 2018. But I do think, based on previous experience of districting commissions in the city, I think that's more than attainable, and I would, without setting a specific date on the wall, would kind of say what we have up there. I anticipate it would be done by late summer at the very latest in terms of the submission of a plan and also the adjustment of those precinct boundaries in Chapter 38. So I would just kind of like to pause there and ask if you have any questions with respect, particularly about the application process. Applications would be submitted to my office, and we would obviously hold on to them until the 23rd, after which time they'll be distributed amongst the council.
Councilor Neitzer.
What are the The requirements or the disqualifications to become a member?
The requirements are as they are within for regular commissions, as codified in city ordinance, and that is you have to be a registered voter, but in this case you have to be a registered voter in the district upon which you're applying. So that's really the qualifications. And then there are other provisions that you'll take into account as a city council when you go through the selection process.
But any registered voter who lives in a particular district is welcome to apply?
They certainly can, yes.
Councilor, ladies first, Staley.
Absolutely.
I have two questions. The first is for you, Tom. How are you going to advertise for this?
Well, there are a couple things that I've tried to get the ball rolling on. First, we have some media available today, and I've already done one interview before this. Pending no objections from the council, I'm going to send a news release out. We do have it posted, a link to the districting webpage on the city council webpage and also on the clerk's webpage. And I also think the other piece that's important is just word of mouth. Of course, all of you getting the word out and encouraging folks to apply.
Okay, thanks. And Jeff, a question for you. And I remember when this was going on before, it affected the central district, I think, that it went farther south on that. So when they're going about this, do they just start from scratch? Is every district is every boundary going to be affected, or how does?
Good question. At this point, initial review, it looks like with the 178,000 population that we have, everybody needs to be around 35,000 of the 5. So initially, Central and Northeast are too small. So Central and Northeast have to gain. So to answer your question, those are the two that are going to have to take precincts from the districts of the other 3 to gain. And that's the same thing that happened last time. The Northeast and the Central had to take small precincts to add on to those districts. And that's the challenge. People go, well, can we take this house and can we take this block? You can't take houses. You take precincts and you move them in, and there's not a lot of options. You just go, this precinct, oh, wait, now that's 40,000. Okay, get back down to 35. So Central will grow, Northeast will grow, and the other ones will all kind of balance out, and then you get them all at 35, and my work's done.
So every district will be affected, or are there some that
we don't know that yet.
Oh, so some could be some over on the other side could be left alone. It could be. Yeah. Yes. Right. Yes. Okay.
Don't know. Councilor Starr.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Oh, Jeff, hang on a second. Tell me about I guess the thing that stands out to me as we're discussing this is that on one side we talk about census numbers, or being with census numbers with the best estimate that's available. And so how do we balance those two numbers not having current census data? I know that that's part of the demography part of your job, and I guess it's just one of those things that kind of stands out to me, that balancing those numbers.
The charter says that you can use the census because, again, think about it, in the state of South Dakota, a lot of communities aren't growing at all, or your best population estimate. So it's set up for your best population estimate. And then what we do is we use our housing numbers and our population estimates to come back and say, based upon that, let's put them in the precincts and put them in the districts, and then we come up with that population area. So you're using your population estimate. At the same time, I'm referring back to the census estimates that come out in July. But
it makes sense. It's kind of balancing the
all
numbers.
told, I use my population estimates that we do as of January of each year, not the 18-month-old census ones.
Makes sense.
So
the other part is probably more of a comment than anything else. I think the other thing that stands out to me initially is we spend a lot of time talking about being nonpartisan.
Yeah.
We're all there. And then the charter specifically says you can't have more than of each party or 3 of one party in looking at that. So in the process that the redistricting commission will use, do they have the ability to use voter registration numbers as part of making those precinct changes? And that's probably more of a legal question than
It's not a planning question.
Exactly. Thank you. Take the.
Yeah, I suppose they could consult those. I mean, those numbers are available publicly, but the numbers that, or the figures, or the process we go off of is the demographic information that the planning commission or the planning department has.
But you look at
your point's well taken. It is mentioned in there, and I'm sure there is some sort of check. It's in there for some sort of check to be in place. But
I guess maybe here's the way to ask the question. Will the redistricting commission be able to use those as part of their discussion that there's X Democrats, Republicans, and Independents as we shift those, or are we going to instruct them that they need to relook at just numbers by precinct?
Leave that to Jeff.
We tell them that they just look at the numbers. Again, the clerks facilitates the commission meetings, and during the commission meetings and during our public meetings, this is just numbers based. And again, what they do outside of that commission meeting is what they do outside. But during the meetings that we facilitate with the clerks, it's only about our numbers.
Perfect.
Yep.
Thank you.
Counselor Selberg.
Thank you. I'm not quite sure who it'd be for, but kind of a down-the-road question on this topic. I mean, as Sioux Falls continues to grow at this pace, I mean, is there a population threshold we'd ever hit where you'd add a district? Or would you have to be, I mean, I know we're talking charter right now a little bit, but I mean, or would you add an at-large when you get to 250,000 people? Or
It would be a charter question and something that's probably worth visiting within the next several years. Yeah. But yes, conceivably it is. But the threshold for the size of wards by South Dakota law is actually very small, so there's not a set number out there that we would use to make that determination.
So 18 years ago, did we have the same amount of councilors and a mayor, 8 and 1, and when we were, okay.
Counselor Staley again.
Two questions for you, Tom. When will the website be ready?
Pending no objection, it's actually ready now when it's up.
Okay, and then when how many meetings did you say the commission is going to have, or is that up to them?
That would be up to them, but it's varied in the past. It's ranged anywhere over the last 20 years or 18 years from just a handful of meetings to actually go through the work of looking at options. I'm talking 2 to 5, up to 6 to 9 meetings.
And those will all be open to the public?
Absolutely.
And videotaped?
They'll be open to in the past, they have not been videotaped, but.
Thank you.
That was good, Counselor. Counselor Erickson.
One thing that I know that we talked about briefly was what happens if a counselor's districted out. And so we discussed that. And so maybe if you could just educate us on that.
Right,
I'm at large, so I'm safe.
It does not impact the at-large members, but there are a few, there are 5 district members. The way it impacts you, it's outlined in Section 2.06 of the Charter. You finish your current term, and during your next election, you would either have to move or run in a different district.
Or at large.
Or any one of a variety of things, but you cannot run in that previous district.
Counselor Urtenbach.
I think that's also covered by state law.
No, it's charter.
But it's covered by state law as well. I thought there was action
Maybe,
in the legislature in the last couple
I know it's in our charter
It
that way,
happens.
so. Okay. Anything else? This is an important topic. Thank you, Tom, for your work on this. I know you'll follow through on it and get it completed in a nonpartisan and the best way possible, and we'll have some new districts when we get done. So thank you again very much. We'll look forward for continuing reports on this.
Thank you, and I just have, if you will indulge me, just one last slide here, which does provide that information. I'm going to step off now, but I will take some hard copy applications and place them on the table out here for folks to use, but you could also access this online.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, moving right along. We are at mixed-use parking. There we are. Mr. Ketchum, Director Ketchum.
Good afternoon, councilors. Thanks for having us this evening. Darren Ketchum with the Sioux Falls Department of Community Development. We're here today to more formally introduce you and the citizens of Sioux Falls to our proposed mixed-use public parking project, private development partner. This is one of those projects that's been many years in the making, first identified in 2007 and again in 2014. Further identified in the Downtown 2025 plan as a necessary development to support other development within our downtown. This project is one that takes I would say, an underutilized piece of public property and truly maximizes the value by bringing private development to it, which in turn also creates revenue through property taxes, potentially sales tax, and other. This is part of the project that we've been discussing with you for the last few months, and we're still in that design stage. As you remember, the council budgeted about $3.5 million in the 2017 capital plan for us to carry forward the planning effort of this project, and we continue those efforts, but today we're proud to continue those efforts with our private partner, and that partner is with us today, Mr. Norm Drake of Legacy Developments. And I'd like to invite Mr. Drake to just introduce himself to you and some of the concepts and ideas that he has that we'll be working on together over the next few months to finalize this project and bring it back to the council for your consideration with a final design and a dollar amount that the public portion of the project will cost. So, Mr. Drake, if you'd like to say a few words to the council.
Thanks, Darren. Appreciate that.
Welcome.
Thank you, councilors. Norman Drake, Legacy Developments. We're very, very excited to have been selected in this process. We think that this will be an iconic project for the city of Sioux Falls and for the development company as well. We're excited in working with the city and all of the people they've selected in this process. In terms of programming, as Darren mentioned, we are at a point where we are just starting to develop some concepts and some things that may work. We're cognizant that we're going to have some retail component to the product. We want to focus on the millennials. We want to have some focus towards the millennials, create some unique maybe co-working space if it'll allow, some unique outdoor living spaces, and hopefully some living spaces as well. If you have any questions, I'm here to answer them.
Any questions for Mr. Drake?
Thank you very
We
much.
thank you for being selected and for putting your name in, and we look forward to some good things coming out of this project.
Thank you very much.
Did you have anything else, Rector?
No, councilors. We'd just like to again thank you, and we look forward to our continued dialogue with you. Now as these details really start to emerge, you'll see an aggressive communications effort to make sure that we are keeping you apprised of the details of this project beyond kind of the big conceptual boxes that are out there. We will work and communicate with you, and whether it's through regular meetings, but we have also asked maybe working through Jim David or other council staff on a more regular basis. It seems like a more effective way to keep in touch with all 8 of you. So, but we continue to kind of work that plan with the council, and certainly welcome any feedback or questions.
Super. Any questions for Director? Councilor Urtenbach.
Thank you. A couple of things. Darren, can you remind us who was on the selection team for this project?
I can. It was myself, Tom Huber from Finance, Brent O'Neill from Economic Development, Matt Nelson, our Public Parking Manager, Joe Batchelor, the Executive Director of Downtown Sioux Falls, Councilor Erickson, and former Chief Project Manager Kendra Simmonsma.
Good, thank you. Can you give us kind of an idea, remind us again, what sort of were the parameters? What were the must-haves for this project? Obviously, it had to have parking. Were there other things that were sort of part of the must-have list?
Mixed use is really the big thing, and from all of the partners, especially our downtown partners, what we really don't want is another just standalone parking ramp. And so for us, one of the must-haves is one of the pedestrian level facing 10th Street. We have to have some commercial use there. We do not want something that can't be used by the public. And that'll be a privately held commercial space. The city's not going to own any commercial space at the end of the day. That will all be privately owned and privately operated. So that was one of the must-haves, is that pedestrian level. We wanted the aesthetics to be, aesthetically pleasing, complementary to our downtown. We don't want it to look like a parking ramp. We want to really do our best to make sure when you drive by that, it just looks like just a magnificent building in downtown Sioux Falls, and just so happens that there's quite a few parking spaces in it. But the goal is, from the outside, you shouldn't be able to tell.
So the original, I don't know if it's the original, but one of the original proposals for this project included a hotel process and all of that, and became whatever happened to, I'm not sure, we all know. Mr. Drake suggested there might be residential involved. How do you think about that? Is that part of that definition of mixed use, or what's your vision for this?
Absolutely. I think that mixed use includes both retail or that commercial use, but also residential, improving that density of downtown. What we found is the more people living downtown that create that demand every day for goods and services, the stronger our downtown is. Certainly, a hotel could be one of those commercial purposes, but the market conditions really have to drive that, and that private investment, I think, has to drive that, because the city's not going to invest those enterprise funds in that private activity. So we're trying to cast a wide net with mixed use, at the same time understand that we're not paying for it, so it's a little bit more difficult for us to dictate it has to be this or it has to be that. But in concept, I think we're all in agreement of the mixed uses with residential, potentially, and office, retail.
Okay. Mr. Chair,
Yes.
might I ask one more, please?
You certainly may.
Thank you. My last question then, you kind of referred to it earlier, was the communications plan. Very often when we hear this announcement, we get you'll see us every 2 months, or you'll see us 4 times a year. Do you have kind of an idea? Do you have a communications plan or what's your goal for that?
Our goal is to get to the council approximately every 6 weeks. More regular updates with council staff and working with them, whether that's, I don't think weekly is necessary, but if it's every 2 weeks, to have a detailed sit down between the developer, ourselves, council staff, just to make sure that they can bring any questions maybe that you want them to pose to us, or to just sit and listen and to bring information back. But we do feel that it's multiple efforts, with those meetings with staff and coming back to informational meetings like this. Certainly we'll also be back for contractual items. The architect contract should be coming here in the next couple of weeks, which we fully intend on bringing to the council for approval and discussion. So you'll see those items outside of just the normal or more routine communications plan.
Okay, thank you.
Councilor Neitzer.
So I think you've answered one of the first questions I had was, so if we were to build the ramp, then of course you have the private development on top, and then you have the retail on the bottom floor. So I take it, as you stated, the retail then would essentially wrap around, and they would own the pedestrian level, at least the front part, the retail space. We don't build any of that, own it, control it?
No, we're still working through, obviously, the details of that, but the city would not retain the ownership and be in the real estate business.
Okay, and then, so you'll be coming to us with the final design, a schematic design, which should give you nail down a number, as it were?
Absolutely. The schematic design and the schematic price will be coming to you, we think will be in that mid to late April timeframe. And also the development agreement. Certainly the city council has to approve the agreement with the developer, and so we'll also be giving you updates on that.
Okay, and then just my only statement, for me, to help me, I think, is if I had, and I don't have to have exact dates, of course, but kind of like a list of the gates that we have to go through. Like the architect's thing is coming first, and then we're going to approve a CMAR, and then we're going to, it just kind of
we have a milestone listing, certainly, that we'll provide to the council that'll go through and say, you can expect this milestone, and here's approximately when you should be receiving that. And kind of that sequence of events, so that way you understand. These are all the things that we still have to get done. There's still a lot of work. This is a really complex project, but we'll hit those milestones over the next at least 2 months. But certainly we'll include the construction timeline, which we expect, late summer to kick off. And ours is, we think, will be about a year-long process with the private development following on that. But we'll include a broad timeline, but then a more near term of, hey, these are the things you should expect and the time you should expect them.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I'm looking for like you said,
You want a Gantt chart
order
type
of operations of the official approvals that we have to go through, so we can kind of get it in our mind how this is going to look.
Absolutely.
Okay, thanks.
Councilor Stately.
I was at the press conference last week, and nothing was mentioned formally about Legacy in conjunction with the Copper Lounge collapse, but there was something in the paper about it. Apparently there was some comments made to the reporter, and I will tell you that there has been some concern with citizens, the community, about going forward with this before everything is settled with that situation. Okay, I just have to tell you that that's out there.
Thanks, Councilor.
And I don't know what the timeline, I think there would be much more of a confidence moving forward if that thing was all resolved, the investigation that's still ongoing. Okay.
Thanks, Councilor. I appreciate that comment. And, you know, we're very mindful of that event and that tragedy. And one of the things that we look at is just the resiliency of our community and our ability to bounce back from these types of tragedies. And for all those people involved, you know, we continue to think about them. And, you know, even the company, the construction company that was really running that piece of it is not involved in this project. It's a separate company. And, you know, when we look at the experience of the firm in developing complex projects and the principles of that firm, you know, Mr. Drake as a principal of the firm and Dr. Sink as a principal and Gil Haugen as a principal, we look at their collective ability to bring a project forward and then also the ability to source capital and complete complex projects. We take all those things into consideration. Certainly, we take your comments into consideration, understand the complexity that adds.
Councilor Starr.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. What happens, we've seen the plan kind of move from starting at 12 to 17, and I know we're too early for numbers yet, but I think we're making a lot of assumptions bringing a partner on prior to cost estimates and whether we've made a final decision as a council if this is a project we're moving forward with. Part of the message that we sent as part of the budget was that until we know what the project is, it's kind of hard to move forward with it. Mm-hmm. But it appears to me that we're putting the cart ahead of the horse to have a partner who may be, I won't use all the terms that, disillusioned by the process or that we're not moving there, but if the cost estimates come back at 20 million mm-hmm. or 25 million, where's that number for us? We haven't made a decision to move forward with this process, or we're all acting like we're building a ramp mm-hmm. this summer before we even know what it's going to cost. And I think that there's the citizens of Sioux Falls don't have a lot of appetite to borrow a lot of additional funds and things. And so I guess I caution the process that until we see cost estimates, we haven't made a decision to move forward on this project, at least not from my point of view.
Yeah, I understand that, Councilor. And I think everybody involved in this project, especially our proposed private partner, understands there's risk in this. There's not a scenario where there's a zero risk project. And they understand as they're making strategic decisions on this that if that scenario plays out and say the city decides not to do it, that there are losses that will be recognized. And the city has not signed an agreement that says we will do this. Everybody is fully aware that the schematic design and price has to be brought back to the council, and the council has to approve and authorize this project. Certainly without that, there's nothing to agree on with the developer, and they're well aware of that is out there. But we felt it was very important to, as we go through this details process and getting to that schematic design, we need that private partner on to show us, here's what I intend to do with that private development to ensure that, hey, this is something that does fit kind of that broad vision we have. And so that's why we've brought them on, and we wanted to make that public. And so that way we can have some more of those conversations about the details, and everybody knows who we're talking with and what we're talking about.
Thanks. Good point. Mm-hmm. Good point. But we're, it's kind of like the chicken or the egg, it seems like, you know? We've got to have the, you know, which one came first, the drawings or the approval, and you know, you've got to have a little bit of both, and that's where we're at. Councilor Kiley.
And Director Ketchum, thank you for the clarification with bringing a partner on at this point in time, because it would be difficult for the city to build private residences without a partner. Where, as you stated earlier, we're not going into the real estate business.
No, we shouldn't be building.
Okay, and so that does make sense that we have somebody that's willing to come on board with us and assume that aspect of the job. Can you talk a little bit, just address the funding aspect of it and the enterprise funds, and tell me what percentage of the parking system currently, if any, has any debt, and just how that works in terms of paying off this particular project?
Well, most of you are aware, the enterprise funds are the user fees, so only those people that use it will be paying for it. There's no intention or plan, there's no second penny investment in this project. It's just those user fees, the hourly and monthly customers we have. We don't have debt as a system, and that's really a great thing, obviously, when you're starting to go down the road of we need to borrow some money and do some bonds to actually do this project. The important thing for us is that it is all enterprise driven. It's not the taxpayers of Sioux Falls that are being asked to pay for this construction. It will be the users of the parking system.
And I understand we are 100% leased?
Yes, we're over 100% right now with the system as it is today.
And debt-free, so money coming in.
Absolutely. Yeah, we're in the strongest financial position, frankly, that the parking system's ever been in. We are working through the financial models to, look at very dire situation of if revenues fall off, this is how much we could afford. This is how much we could afford in an average year. But understanding that likely over the course of the debt that would be issued, we'll have another recession in there, and we have to be able to weather that as well. But we have a very strong cash position today, well over $3 million, and we know the strength of the system is getting stronger every day.
Councilor Staley.
But back to, we've had this discussion before with that second penny. There was a plan, maybe it's been aborted, but to have that as collateral, right? We talked about that last week.
Yep.
So that would be the backup if for some reason things fell apart.
Yeah, certainly you have to secure that debt, and you offer some of those things as collateral. And we would work with the city's financial advisor through the finance department to bring forward, here's what that really looks like to the council. Here's the money that essentially you would be, if you had to go to a higher interest rate, or what that may be if you weren't to use that as the kind of the backing, those revenue bonds. So understand.
I was told after that press conference that there were other funding sources that could be used as collateral.
And we'll work with the finance department and the city's financial advisor to work through those scenarios and bring one back to the council for your approval that is fiscally responsible and meets the intent of the project.
Councilor Kiley.
It might be difficult for you to answer this question since all of our ramps, every aspect of our parking system is currently paid off. We have no debt, no loans that we're paying on. But with any of the past loans necessary for building a ramp, has it ever been necessary to utilize the collateral that's been used to back up our enterprise fund system?
I would defer if Tracy wants to. I can't think of anything that the city has done where they've had to tap into that, Tracy. I don't know if, he's confirming that. The city has never had to do that.
I think that would have made a big splash in the paper someplace, and I don't remember anything in the last 25 years of that happening. So,
and we'll certainly give the council the detailed financial modeling of how we support this and why we can pay for this and how we can handle this debt based on our income.
Councilor
But
Staley?
just a closing note, we are also coming into uncharted waters when it comes to our budget moving ahead with sales tax growth. And so we are, I think, across the board, we're starting to become much more cautious about how we're moving forward.
Yep,
True?
understand. I understand, Councilor. Certainly the sales tax growth has not been what we...
So in the past, we've had a different scenario as far as parking ramps.
What do you mean by different scenarios?
I mean, the environmental, the climate financially has been more secure than it is right now.
We've paid for these with
Sales tax
enterprise.
revenue has been growing at a nice rate. We've had great prosperity in our community.
We've gone through recessions with those two, and they've never had to dip into that. They've always sustained themselves. I guess that would be the point I would make on that, is that we've never had to use collateral to make, take out a second penny or even first penny.
We've never
to
had this
make
much
those
debt
payments.
before either. So, I mean,
What?
we've never had this much debt before either.
Well, that I can't answer, and I'm not going to get into that at this point. So, but anyway, I would.
Thanks, Council. If you have any questions, certainly we would be ready to answer more. If you want to talk more about this project, we'll be glad to get into the details here in the coming weeks and months. So thank you very much for.
Thank you very much, Darren. Mr. David. Oh, you have a question over here. Oh, okay. Mr. David?
Good afternoon, Council. I will try to be very brief. I understand we have a working session that is coming up here. Last Thursday actually marked the day that individual bills could be introduced. So I think it's fair to say we're beginning to have a more clear picture of this legislative session and its impact on local government, both positive and negative. Senator Deb Peters has prime sponsored a couple bills that address the 911 emergency needs in South Dakota. Senate Bill 113 takes a carrot and stick approach by extending the sunset on the 911 surcharge increase by 1 year, but the bill also creates basic compliance standards for 911 call centers in the state. Failure to be in compliance would jeopardize a call center's 911 surcharge funds. Senate Bill 121 appropriates more than $3 million to the state's radio signal coverage gaps and upgrades the state radios to the P25, which is the national standard for public safety communications utilized by both federal and state governments. The Municipal League supports both of these bills, and they currently sit in joint appropriations. Representative Greg Jamieson is proposing House Bill 1167 to provide greater flexibility when it comes to publishing legal notices. This bill would allow first-class cities, those that are 5,000 more in population, the option to post legal notices online instead of the official newspaper. If a municipality opts to publish online, the bill provides residents an opportunity to receive legal notices via U.S. mail or email at the expense of the municipality. House Local Government is scheduled to hear this bill at 10 a.m. on Thursday. As you know, South Dakota law has allowed counties and cities to enter into joint planning and zoning agreements for decades. Sioux Falls has enjoyed joint jurisdiction with Minnehaha County since 1968, and in 2002 it entered into a joint jurisdiction agreement with Lincoln County. House Bill 1075 would repeal joint jurisdiction, and thus it is strongly opposed by the Municipal League. House Local Government is scheduled to hear this bill on Thursday, February 9th. This is the legislative calendar as it currently stands. As I pointed out, last Thursday was the last day to introduce a bill, and this Saturday is the second legislative coffee. It'd be districts 10, 13, 16, and 25. On the 23rd of this month is the last day to pass a bill out of the House of Origin. March 7th is the last day to pass a bill in both houses. Recess on March 10th, and veto day is on March 27th. Be happy answering your questions.
Are there any questions for Mr. David? Appreciate very much your input on this, and we'll look forward to visiting with some of the legislators next or tomorrow and Wednesday as the Municipal League. We meet with Municipal League in Pierre. Councilor Erpenbach.
Prior to your adjournment, I just wanted to remind everyone that the Fiscal Committee is meeting in working session. We'll be in the overflow room. We're at a point where we really have to just kind of be down and dirty on figures and,
right.
and information, and so that's where we'll be. We'll start about 5 minutes after your gavel.
Right, and 5 minutes from right now.